Ubisoft has done it again. This time, that rake is Red Storm Entertainment. If that name means something to you, congratulations. Your back hurts when you stand up too fast, and you remember when Tom Clancy games were allowed to have dignity. Red Storm lost 105 jobs and Ubisoft ended game development at the studio. Not the studio itself, no, because that would at least be honest. Ubisoft kept the building alive so it can handle global IT and Snowdrop engine support. That is executive language for, we are not technically killing it, we are just removing the part that had a soul. That is the move. That is the trick. They did not slam the door and turn off the lights. They left the lights on, took all the furniture, pawned the family silver, and then told everyone the house is still standing. Sure. If I remove your steering wheel, your brakes, your seats, and the engine, I have not destroyed your car. I have simply repositioned it as a storage locker with legacy tires. And Red Storm is not some random office park team that made a puzzle game nobody remembers. This is Red Storm. Founded in 1996 by Tom Clancy and others, this group helped define early Rainbow Six. They also shaped Ghost Recon. The studio carried the serious military, no clown shoes identity those games had, before every publisher in the industry started chasing engagement metrics like raccoons digging through a dumpster behind a casino. So, when people hear that 1 out of 5 employees were cut at Red Storm Entertainment on March 19, they do not hear a normal layoff memo. They hear a eulogy wearing a lanyard. They hear a company taking one of its old championship banners, folding it into a neat square, and using it to wipe down a conference table. And Ubisoft, bless its heart, always delivers these things in that polished tone that says please remain calm while we remove another organ. They never say we ended game development at one of Tom Clancy's most important studios. No, it becomes a strategic realignment, a transition, an evolution, a refocusing. The company talks about bad news the way a magician talks about a missing volunteer. Is she gone? Or has she simply entered an exciting new phase of support operations? Because that is the safe wording here. Do not say Ubisoft closed Red Storm. That is not accurate. The publisher ended game development there, and the studio now continues as a support operation for global IT and Snowdrop engine support. That wording matters. Precision is vital, because the truth is somehow meaner than the rumor. We shut it down as brutal. We kept it open, but only for spreadsheets and engine support, is the kind of sentence that makes a fan stare out a window during lunch. And that is why this story lands harder than a routine cut. The number is 105. The symbolism is the real body blow. Ubisoft did not just trim a team. It severed game development from a studio tied to the early identity of Tom Clancy games. That feels less like a budget move, and more like the final scene in a long hostage video, where the hostage turns out to be the company's own legacy. You can feel the age of this story in your knees. Red Storm was acquired by Ubisoft in 2000. Back then, that sounded like the future. You heard the name and thought maybe this studio would get bigger budgets, bigger reach, or maybe stronger support. Instead, over the years, the whole thing started to resemble one of those renovation shows. The host says, "We preserved the character," and then you look inside. It is white walls, grey floors, no doors, and a kitchen island the size of Belgium. Because, let us be honest, Red Storm had already been dragged away from its old image long before this announcement. In recent years, it was better known for VR work, Werewolves Within, Star Trek Bridge Crew, Assassin's Creed Nexus VR, and I am not here to insult those games, just because some guys panic when they have to wear a headset. But let us not pretend that the team which helped define Rainbow Six is now doing support work after a run of VR titles sounds like a victory lap. That sounds like finding out your old drill sergeant now hands out brochures in a mall kiosk. And while Red Storm was doing that, the main Tom Clancy leadership had shifted elsewhere in Ubisoft. That is another part of the sadness. Fans did not lose the center of the action overnight. They watched the focus move away year after year, until the studio that used to help define the tone of the brand started to feel like an elderly relative. They sit quietly at the end of the table while louder cousins argue about monetization. Then came the cancelled projects, because, of course, there were cancelled projects. Every modern publisher has to keep a few failed ideas in the attic like cursed dolls. In Red Storm's case, 2 titles hang over this story like storm clouds with expense reports. Splinter Cell VR got cancelled in 2022. The Division Heartland got cancelled in 2024. At that point you did not need a detective, you needed a priest. Those cancellations made this ending feel less like a surprise, and more like the last ugly step in a decline everybody could see, but nobody wanted to say out loud. And then, Ubisoft rolled out its broader reset in January 2026. No corporate tragedy is complete without a PowerPoint theme. This was the big one. The company announced a new Creative Houses model, 6 cancelled games, 7 delayed projects, and an additional €200 million in fixed cost reductions over 2 years. €200 million. fixed cost reductions. Hear that? That is the sound of every human being in the room turning into a line item, while someone with a smartwatch says the pain will create agility. So yes, the Red Storm cuts fit inside a larger campaign. But that does not make them smaller. It makes them colder. It tells fans this was not some isolated accident. This was part of a map. Somebody looked at the board, looked at one of the studios with real historic identity, and decided the best use of Red Storm was not making games, but supporting systems. That is like inheriting a famous restaurant and deciding the kitchen should be converted into printer storage, because the brand still has value, and the fans know exactly what they are grieving. Go look at the reactions and you see the same pattern over and over. There is sadness about what Rainbow Six used to be. There is frustration with live service thinking. There is anger that Ubisoft kept the names, kept the branding, and kept the old uniforms hanging in the closet, but slowly drained out the tone. They lost the style and the identity that made those names matter in the first place. It is not just nostalgia. It is recognition. People can tell when a company preserves the logo but misplaces the spirit. That is why the cleanest angle is not deep corporate jargon. Nobody outside investor circles wants to hear a bedtime story about restructuring architecture. The line that hits is simple: the studio that helped build Rainbow Six and Ghost Recon is no longer making games. There it is. You can feel the weight in one sentence. No jargon. No perfume on the corpse. Just a plain statement that lands like a boot on old memories. And yes, there is video value in that, because the coverage does not look completely flooded. It is not wall-to-wall saturation where every channel on Earth already squeezed the lemon dry. It looks more like medium coverage. A few dedicated videos, some shorts and some roundup coverage exist. At least one dedicated piece is pulling decent views. There is enough interest that people care, but not so much that the topic is dead on arrival, which is perfect, because this kind of story works best when it feels like viewers are processing the loss in real time. It is better than getting the 50th reheated take from a man yelling into a webcam with a shelf full of collectible helmets. Still, accuracy matters, so let us keep the wording sharp. Say Ubisoft ended game development at Red Storm. Do not say Ubisoft shut Red Storm down. Say 105 jobs were cut or 105 employees were laid off. Mention that Red Storm now supports global IT and Snowdrop. Do not say it vanished from the earth. Note it was founded in 1996 and acquired by Ubisoft in 2000. Those are the clean facts. Build your performance around those facts, and then let the roast do the rest. Because honestly, Ubisoft has achieved a rare feat here. It found a way to make corporate language feel more insulting than open cruelty. We value this studio so much that it will continue existing, just not for the thing that made anyone care about it. Amazing. That is like telling a legendary guitarist, good news, we are keeping you in the band. Bad news, we sold your guitar and now you handle printer setup. And if you are a long-time Tom Clancy fan, that is the real sting. Not just that jobs were lost, though that is awful. Nor just that a studio changed roles, though that is severe. It is that one of the names tied to the old standard is now being wheeled off stage, while the company still expects applause for keeping the costume. Ubisoft did not merely cut jobs. It ended game development at one of Tom Clancy's most important studios, then tried to present the body as if it had simply accepted a nice office transfer. That is not a normal layoff note. That is a landmark being turned into back office support while the plaque stays out front. And if you want the most honest summary possible, here it is. Red Storm helped build the old Clancy identity. Ubisoft spent years drifting away from that identity. The cancelled projects signaled the decline. The 2026 cost-cutting reset supplied the knife. And now, the studio that once helped define tactical shooters has been told its future is tech support with a famous surname. And that performance gap is the whole show, is it not? Ubisoft keeps acting like fans are too sentimental to understand business, when fans usually understand the business perfectly. They know budgets exist. They know projects fail. They know companies cut staff. What they do not buy is the insult layered on top. They hate the part where a publisher strips the engine out of a famous studio, and then says the vehicle remains an important part of the fleet. That is not strategy speaking. That is management trying to gaslight anyone old enough to remember why Red Storm mattered. Fans are not confused because change happened. Fans are furious because Ubisoft keeps selling the change as continuity. It is like everybody should nod along while history gets fed into a paper shredder labeled innovation. At some point, you stop calling that a transition and start calling it what it looks like, a memorial service with HR vocabulary. Indeed now,